So good day everyone. Today we'll tackle things with regard to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So before we discuss what's inside our slides, let's check out the Russia's history first. So in the early 1990s, Russia was one of the most impoverished countries in the Europe, with an enormous peasantry and growing minority of poor industrial workers. The Russian Empire practiced serfdom. So what is serfdom? Serfdom is a form of feudalism in which landless peasants were forced to serve the land-owning nobility. But soon enough, the Russian Empire finally abolished serfdom. The emancipation of serfs would influence the events leading up to the Russian Revolution by giving peasants more freedom to organize. So, what exactly is the USSR? So, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was constitutionally socialist state that existed in Eurasia from 1922 to 1991, by which we commonly known as Soviet Union. So, first, we have Russian Revolution of 1917. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was one of the most explosive political events of the 20th century. The violent revolution marked the end of Romanov dynasty and centuries of Russian Empire rule. During the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks, led by leftist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, seized power and destroyed the tradition of fascist rule. The Bolsheviks would later become the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In 1917, two revolutions swept through Russia, ending centuries of imperial rule and setting into the motion political and social changes that would lead to the formation of the Soviet Union. While the two revolutionary events took place within a few short months, a social unrest in Russia had been simmering for decades. On 28 December 1922, a conference of plenipotentiary delegations from Russian SFSR, the Transcaucasian, the Ukrainian, and the Belarusian approved the Treaty of the Creation of USSR and the Declaration of the Creation of USSR, forming the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. Okay, this is USSR state emblem. This symbolizes the Soviet emblem of the hammer and sickle and the red star over a globe, and two wreaths of Imer wheat, covered by workers of the world, unite. In the official languages of the Soviet republics in reverse order, they were mentioned in the Soviet Constitution. Each Soviet republics and autonomous Soviet republics had its own coat of arms, largely inspired by the state emblem of the Union. So, USSR is composed of 15 sub-national Soviets, which of course, first we have Russia, then Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Next, centralized economy and planning. So, the economy of Soviet Union was based on the state ownership of the means of production, collective farming, and industrial manufacturing. The highly centralized Soviet-type economic planning was managed by the administrative command system. Next is USSR is one-party rule. So the political system of the Soviet Union took place in the federal single-party Soviet Socialist Republic framework, which was characterized by the superior rule of Communist Party of the Soviet Union. It is the only party permitted by the Constitution. So, if you can see, there are big difference between the political party of the USSR compared to the Philippines, which have a multi-party system. So, we have choices of which party of candidate to support or participate with, while in the USSR, only one party rule, one political party has the right to form the government in accordance on their constitution. Then following is okay, we are on the highlight of this discussion. So why did the USSR collapse? So in the beginning of the Soviet command economy starting in 1924 with Joseph Stalin's rise to power, a command economy characterized by totalitarian control over political, social, economic life would define the Soviet Union for the most of remaining 20th century.
The Soviet command economy coordinated economic activity through the issuance of directives by setting social and economic targets and by instituting regulations. Um, Soviet uh, Soviet leaders decided on the state's overarching social and economic goals. In order to achieve these goals, Communist Party officials assumed control over the country's social economic activities. The Communist Party legitimized its control by claiming it had the knowledge to direct society that would rival and overtake any Western market economy. Officials manage the significant amount of information necessary for centralizing the planning of both production and distribution. Hierarchical structures were also instituted at all levels of economic activity, with superiors having absolute control over the norms and parameters of planning assignments, as well as setting regular performance, evaluation, and rewards. Okay, following is the initial period of rapid growth. So at first, the Soviet Union experienced rapid economic growth, while the lack of open markets providing price signals and incentives to direct economic activity led to waste and economic inefficiencies. The Soviet economy posted an estimated average annual growth rate in gross national product. The impressive performance was largely due to the fact that as an underdeveloped economy, the Soviet Union could adopt Western technology while forcibly mobilizing resources to implement and utilize such technology. An intense focus on industrialization and urbanization at the expense of personal consumption gave the Soviet Union a period of rapid modernization. However, once the country began to catch up with the West, its ability to borrow ever newer technologies and the productivity effects that came with it soon diminished. Okay, following is the slowing growth and the beginning of reforms. The Soviet economic became increasing complex just as it began running out of development models to imitate. The command economy's stagnation became obvious to the Soviet leaders. The Soviet had been aware since the 1950s of such long-term problems as command economy inefficiencies, and how adapting the knowledge and technology of developed economies could come at the expenses of fostering an innovative domestic economy. Piecemeal reforms like those of the Sovnarkhorsk uh, implemented by Nikita Khrushchev in the late 1950s attempted to begin decentralizing economic control, allowing for a second economic to deal with the increasing complexity of economic affairs. These reforms, however, tore at the root of the command economy's institution, and Khrushchev was forced to re-reform back to centralized control and coordination in the early 1960s. But with economic growth declining and inefficiencies becoming increasingly more apparent, partial reforms to allow for more decentralized market interactions were reintroduced in the early 1970s. The quandary of Soviet leadership was to create a more liberal market system in a society whose core foundation were characterized by the centralized control. Lastly, we have perestroika and collapse. These early reforms failed to revive an increasingly stagnant Soviet economy, with productivity growth falling below zero by the early 1980s. This ongoing poor economic performance led to a more radical set of reforms under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev. While attempting to maintain socialist ideals and central control over primary societal goals, Gorbachev aimed to decentralize economic activity and open the economy up to foreign trade. This restructuring, referred to the perestroika, encouraged individual private incentive, creating greater openness. Perestroika was in direct opposition to previously hierarchical nature of the command economy. But having great access to information helped foster critics of Soviet control, not just one of the economy but also of social life. When the Soviet leadership relaxed control in order to save the faltering economic system, they helped create conditions that would lead to the country's dissolution. While perestroika initially appeared to be success, As Soviet firms took advantage of new freedoms and new investments opportunities, optimism soon faded. A severe economic contraction characterized the late 1980s and early 1990s, which would be the last year of Soviet Union. Soviet leaders no longer had power to intervene amidst the growing economy's chaos. Newly empowered local leaders demanded greater autonomy from central authority, shaking the foundation of the command economy, while more localized cultural identities and prioritized took precedence over national concerns. With its economy and political unity in tatters, the Soviet Union collapsed in the late 1991, fragmenting into 15 separate states. Okay, so before anything else, we will introduce first their flag. So their flag color is red and has a symbol. It is a hammer, crossed with sickle and a star. So the hammer and sickle symbolize the nation's worker and peasants. The star represented the rule of the Communist Party. Okay, so let's move on to disintegration of Soviet states. So the space race was a 20th century competition between two Cold War adversaries, the Soviet Union and the United States of America, to achieve superior spaceflight capability. It had its origin in ballistic missile-based nuclear arms race between the two nations following World War II. So after World War II drew to a close and mid-20th century, a new conflict began, known as the Cold War. This battle pitted the world's two great powers, the democratic capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union, against each other. Beginning in the late 1950s, space would become another dramatic arena for this competition, as each side sought to prove superiority of its technology, its military power, and by extension, its political economic system. So in this regard, USSR spends billions to compete with USA. Following are the things that both nations compete with. So first, we have the satellite, of which one of them, who was at first the satellite in space, then the animal in space. This is where when they test the rocket ships to fly out the space and use animals to go with it instead of astronauts. Next is cosmonaut. So this is where a real person enters and navigate the rockets flying out the space. And lastly, women in space. So Valentina Tereshkova, the Soviet cosmonaut who was the first woman to travel into space. So these competitions between the two nations manifest extreme tension. This is all just for which of them will be hailed as superior between them. Okay, so after the space race, we have the arms race. So arms race occurs when two or more countries increase the size and quality of military resources to gain military and political superiority over one another. So the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union is perhaps the largest and most expensive arms race in history. However, others have occurred, often with dire consequences. Following are the nuclear arsenal, largest in the world, then billions spent on huge army and mutually assured destruction. Then we have Cold War. The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and Soviet Union and their respective allies, the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc, which began following after World War II. So what did USSR do was to increase communist influence, support to Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, China, and many other communist nations. Also, during Cold War, USSR spent on materials and technology. Thus, these nations caused a loss of money. So next is the Afghan War. The Soviet-Afghan War was a conflict wherein insurgent groups known collectively as Mujahideen, as well as smaller Maoist groups, fought a 9-year guerrilla war against the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan and Soviet army throughout the 1980s, mostly in Afghan countryside. So the cost of war was 15,000 soldiers killed, 50,000 wounded, and it drains vital resources. So decline of economy, tight state control over economy in absence of free market economy was draining the USSR's economic strengths. So forward in 1989, year of revaluations. From summer of 1989 till 1991, revaluation in Poland, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Yugoslavia. Nationalists also protest to gain the independence from USSR, influence in communist puppet governments. Despite of all the mess, Gorbachev did not send army to suppress any of the protests of the movement. Soon, Berlin Wall fall in November of 1989, and on December 1989, Bush Sr. announces the end of Cold War. So starting from 1987, the Soviets declared the sovereignty of independence of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And throughout 1990 and 1991, one by one, all the 15 subnational Soviets achieved independence. But however, there are some leaders who wants to pursue the USSR still. On 19 August of 1991, a group of senior party leaders attempted a coup by placing Gorbachev under house arrest and demanding the restoration of USSR. But it was failed as the people in cities rose against it, and the majority of the Red Army refused to support the coup leaders. Next is we have Boris Yeltsin. He is the leader of Moscow unit of Communist Party. He advocated for independence. Russia leader of public in the coup became the first elected president of Russia in July 1991. Okay, so during the failure of coup, the dissolvement of USSR was accelerated. On 8 December of 1991, the president of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus signed the Belovenza Accords, which dissolves the USSR and established the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS, in its place. Gorbachev resigns as president of USSR on 25th of December. Supreme Soviet dissolves the Union on 26th of December. So after USSR finally dissolved, following are negative effects of it. First, severe economic contraction and catastrophic fall in living standard in post-Soviet stats. Increase in poverty, crime, corruption, unemployment, disease, and income inequality. And lastly, the decrease in life expectancy and adult literacy and income. But with the presence of CIS, or Commonwealth Independent States, industrialization was effective, free education was imposed, and program for effective recycling was established. But also, there are also against with it, which addresses the limited personal freedom and deficiency of life choice. Okay, so that's it, and thank you for listening.